Okay, everybody, I'm gonna just kind of walk you through what we got going on with this paper to give you an idea of what's strong about it and what things you can think about when you're working on yours. First of all, I've mentioned this once or twice during the semester, but be sure that you have yourself a title. This is a pretty decent title. It gives you an idea of what the paper is about. And so it announces logic and emotion, or pathos and logos, and it connects it to the notion of climate change. I mean, the author probably comes with something a little bit more interesting and descriptive, but this does the trick. Okay, we've got a relatively long introductory paragraph, and what we got going on here is the vast majority of it describes or gives a kind of a contextual general explanation of what logical arguments are and what pathetic arguments are. And by acontextual, I mean it's not connected to the topic of climate change. It's kind of just a general introduction to these two concepts. And we don't really get to what the paper is about or what we might consider a possible focus for the paper until the final sentence in the paragraph. So the final sentence reads, pathetic and logical arguments can be related, and you can see this through the different viewpoints of climate change. Now, it's kind of an ambiguous sentence, and it's difficult to understand what it means. It seems to be suggesting that the paper is going to be about how pathetic arguments and logical arguments are related, and this could mean a lot of different things. But it really isn't clear, and since the vast majority of the introduction is used to provide a general explanation of pathos and logos, it's not clear how these things connect and what we as readers are supposed to take away, what connection we're supposed to make between these things. So the first thing that I would say to the author is that this general introduction to logic and pathos probably needs to be revised to be an introduction to pathos and logos as it relates to the concept of climate change. In other words, the author needs to come up with some sort of statement or position on how logos and pathos work within this discussion of climate change. And that relation between the concepts and climate change can be gleaned or figured out based on the analysis that the author offers in the following paragraphs. So first thing is focus. The focus is not clear. And so the author needs to work on that. As we move on to the next paragraph, you'll recognize this one as the paragraph that we worked on in class. The author is walking through the NASA article on the NASA website and talks exclusively about logos here and how NASA provides facts and provides documentation backing up those facts, and and uses basically logos factual arguments to support their position that climate change is real. Now that seems to go against this sentence up here that seems to be the focus of the paper, that pathos and logos are somehow related, because in this first example, the author doesn't mention logos and doesn't make a connection between the two. And so there's an inconsistency here. The focus, if you remember the holistic grading scale that I have on Moodle, now the focus is not clear and it's not consistent. And so the author needs to kind of figure out what this paragraph means regarding logos and ethos and what it means in relation to the paragraphs that follow. So let's look at the next few paragraphs. The third paragraph takes another of the articles that we read and analyzes it. And this one is the one by Kit Daniels, which is The Truth About Climate Change. And what the author does here is the author claims that that Daniels is using a logical argument when talking about the Bush administration and their strategy in 2003 to get public support for the invasion of Iraq. And what this appears to be is an example, a logos example, if you remember the discussion of examples, and in particular, it appears to be a historical example. And it would be nice if that was part of the analysis here, is that the author is using a logical argument which takes the form of a historical example. And I kind of felt as if this historical example that the author is taking doesn't really provide the type of explanation or analysis that will convince the reader that this is actually a logos argument. So I feel like the author could expand on that a little bit. What follows is then the author citing a moment where Daniels uses a pathetic argument of fear, and talking about how Daniels sees the U.S. as kind of is trying to get people to believe that is, if the U.S. Kind of goes it alone and the rest of the world doesn't keep up, then our efforts would be futile and expensive, and that will put us at a disadvantage in the world. But again, with this example, or with this reference to the text, I feel like the author is not really giving a good and clear explanation and analysis of what all these things, what these reference to the article, how they are pathetic, how they are pathos. So I would encourage the author to expand that analysis and not just leave it up to the reader to figure out. We end this paragraph with a reference to logos and pathetic arguments kind of working together, and this is a reference, I think, to what is kind of the focus up here. But again, since that second paragraph didn't really make that connection, that really isn't a consistent focus. So again, the author needs to reconsider that focus. The next paragraph is a third example, and this is a third discussion of one of the texts that we use. And this is the video by Jesse Waters from Fox News. And the same thing goes with this particular source. I feel like the author is making statements about how these are pathetic arguments, but not really expanding on and explaining what emotions are supposed to be inspired and why. What is the intention? What is the pathetic argument that Waters is making through this kind of comedy and mocking of other people? What is it that the audience is supposed to feel? And so it would be very helpful, again, if the author would explain that. And so to get back to our holistic discussion, this is development, and the development is not, or the details are not developed enough to really communicate to the reader what it is that the analysis is. So we now have a focus issue, and we have a consistent development issue where the details are not being explained and the analysis is not full enough that we understand what it is the writer is trying to argue to us. And so then we move to the conclusion. And let's see, sometimes different situations. What I would like to see is, once this focus is clarified, is to see kind of a reiteration of that focus. in the conclusion, the kind of bringing together everything and making some sense about it, making sense out of it, making some statement or statements about how we might understand the use of these two arguments within the climate change debate. It's interesting to me that that it appears that the NASA article used 100% logos arguments, used kind of fact-based logos arguments, while the other two sources seem to rely more on pathos, inspiring fear and and making fun of others, making perhaps the point of the Jesse Waters article or video was to make the viewer feel superior to the people that were being interviewed or something like that. So it's there's something to be said, I think, about how this debate works and what types of texts use logos and what types of texts rely more on pathos. And so I would like to see the author and all of you do a bit more, take another step and make some statements about and come to some conclusions about what you think or how you think these arguments are used and potentially why. So that's kind of a walkthrough of a paper, and I guess to go one more time back to the holistic scheme that I came up with, it's got focus problems, it's got development problems, but if you look at it organizationally, it seems to make sense. We have an introduction, we have a few paragraphs that talk about examples, and then we come to some sort of conclusion. And so there's a logical movement, but that logical movement doesn't support any clear, insightful or consistent focus. And the details are, while there are a lot of details in here, they're not developed very well and explained very well. So there's some work to do here, but this is a pretty good start for a draft.